All right. Good morning. Happy Thursday. Yeah, so we've got the remote sensing session going on this morning. We're going to kick it off with Elsa Ordway and Pangea. So Elsa, if you want to bring your computer up here. A few quick announcements for the speakers. I'm going to have this little timer going here, and I'm going to set it at 7 minutes. And so you can keep an eye on that. And then we'll have 3 minutes for questions. And just remember, if you're in the audience, wait for the mic to get to you so people online can hear it as well. All right.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Let me put this in full screen. Great. Okay. My name's Elsa Ordway. I'm faculty at UCLA, and I'm the PI of Pangea, one of two efforts currently being scoped for a possible NASA terrestrial ecology field campaign. You'll hear from ARID, the other team, just after this. So Pangea stands for the Pan-Tropical Investigation of Biogeochemistry and Ecological Adaptation. Before I go into what that actually means and encompasses, I want to just shout out a huge group of folks who are involved in this. It is not just me. We have an amazing leadership team who's been involved in this from the proposal development through the course of this year as we scope this possible campaign. And we have a lot of people who have been volunteering their time to lead working group efforts to actually develop and identify what a campaign like this could achieve in terms of addressing certain knowledge gaps and science gaps. So I want to acknowledge all of those folks. So there was a solicitation that came out last year from NASA to propose ideas for the next possible terrestrial ecology field campaign. And this is directly from the solicitation. What NASA is looking to fund is a campaign that will answer big science questions focused on a particular biome or region. The campaign should enable more effective interpretation and analysis of space-based measurements. It should foster collaborative interactions and build new relationships within the scientific community. It should provide valuable training opportunities, particularly focusing on the next generation of scientists and workforce. And the goal is to, from the outset, be thinking about the legacy of a campaign like this, both in terms of, I think, data, but also relationships. So to provide context, raise your hand if you've heard of Above. Okay, great. Raise your hand if you've heard of LBA. Okay, so these are examples of successful NASA terrestrial ecology field campaigns. Above, for those who are familiar, is currently wrapping up. That's the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment focused on Western Canada and Alaska. And LBA is the large-scale atmosphere experiment in Amazonia. That was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. It was actually led by Brazil, and NASA was involved in a component of it called LBA Eco, funded by NASA's terrestrial ecology, land cover, land use change, and hydrology programs. These campaigns and others before it, Boreas, Fife, really are focused on improving our ability to use satellite remote sensing data sets by using this scaling approach. So recognizing that there's limits to what we can do without really carefully coordinated efforts to interpret what we're getting from satellite data by scaling from leaves and organisms to towers, flux tower data, and then scaling that to remote sensing data that's more coordinated with those scales of measurements through things like drone and aircraft data to ultimately better interpret what we're getting from satellite data. So the scaling diagram on the right is from Above, and that's kind of a hallmark of these campaigns, is that scaling approach. LBA, I think interestingly also was really a success, not only in terms of the scientific advancement, particularly focusing around the Amazon, but it also was really successful because of the capacity building and training. It trained over 1,000 students, many of whom were master's and PhD students from Brazil. And that's something in Pangea we're really trying to build on. So in terms of process, these two proposals were selected and funded to scope possible campaigns, Pangea, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and ARID, which you'll hear about after this. So both teams are spending this year really trying to identify the scientific research priorities and opportunities, build relationships, define shared goals, and really evaluate what's feasible within the scope of a 6 to 9 year campaign. We will both be delivering white papers that outline these campaigns to NASA headquarters at the end of this year on December 6th. And if this is a bit more for how this works based on whichever one is selected, one will be selected early next year, and then there'll be about a 1 to 1.5 year period where NASA actually says, okay, here's the budget you'll actually have. Now let's get into the details of where, when, how. And then there will be a 6 to 9 year campaign that will roll out. The earliest start is likely around 2026. So this is the reason I put all that down, is because it's a long process. We're at the start of kind of a once in a decade opportunity to provide input into one of these two campaigns, which is going to provide and orient funding opportunities that all of you will have access to. So highly encourage you all engage and provide input in one or both of these activities. Why is Pangea focused on the tropics? Because tropical systems are globally critical, despite covering less than 10% of the ice-free land surface. They maintain over 2/3 of biodiversity on the planet. They're home to about 3 billion people who directly and indirectly depend on these systems. And they constitute incredibly important heat and water pumps, contributing to local, regional, and global climate regulation. As you all know, they're also really important for the carbon cycle. We heard about the methane component yesterday from Rob Jackson. They account for about 30% of terrestrial NPP and store huge amounts of carbon. The estimates and the bounds on that are huge because there's a lot we still need to better understand. They're also changing really rapidly. So both in terms of land use change and climate change, we're seeing massive shifts in disturbance regimes, loss of habitat, and this includes things like changing fire regimes, deforestation and degradation as a result of agriculture. This is a photo on the right from the peatland complex in Central Africa, the Cuvette Central. There's huge peatlands in these systems that are already changing in ways in response to climate change. And I included this figure on the bottom that's showing GPP and ET estimates of kind of vulnerability in response to future change from a paper that Sasan Sachi led a few years ago to emphasize the heterogeneity of these responses. So we often kind of refer to the tropics as a single biome and a monolith. And in fact, it's incredibly heterogeneous and diverse. And Pangea is really focused on trying to improve understanding of that diversity and those diversity of responses to change, given that we're already seeing evidence of really distinct responses. Zooming back out, we're thinking about this particularly from the context of the carbon cycle dynamics. And if we look at global land fluxes, there's huge uncertainty in terms of how the carbon terrestrial flux is going to respond to future change. So this is 11 different Earth system models projecting the land flux out to the end of the century, and they completely diverge in terms of whether they predict that the land flux will continue to store or emit carbon to the atmosphere. And other work has emphasized that a lot of the variability underpinning that uncertainty in the models is in the tropics. So you're now seeing latitude here on the x-axis and net ecosystem productivity trends predicted out to the end of the century. And there's about 3 times greater variability in model predictions in the tropics compared to other latitudes. There's been efforts, particularly within the CMIP community, to constrain that uncertainty. And so you can see an example on the right now in terms of differences between CMIP 5 and CMIP 6. And a lot of that constrained output, variability of output, is associated with inclusion of nutrient limitations, particularly nitrogen limitations in models. But there's still huge questions about, are we getting the right answers for the right reasons? And are we embedding processes effectively, accurately in these models? So Pangea is working with the Rubisco and ILAM communities to think about what processes need to be better understood in these models and how can we improve remote sensing data model integration to better parameterize and initialize and benchmark these models. I mentioned that we're already seeing examples of distinct responses. This is an example I like to share. It's from Orbiting Carbon Observatory data, which is measuring CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere from a satellite. This is a paper that Junji Liu led in 2017, and it showed that in response to the 2015 El Nino, all of these tropical continents, which are on average, although huge amounts of variability, on average a carbon sink, flipped temporarily to becoming carbon sources to the atmosphere, but for different reasons. And so in the Americas, it was a drier land surface that led to less plant growth. In Africa, it was higher temperatures and increased respiration. And in Asia, it was hotter, drier conditions and more fires. And we heard yesterday too about things like mapping biomass carbon stocks from remote sensing. You're not going to be able to get at things like respiration changes from that, right? So we need to be integrating different kinds of data sets and methods, including data from eddy flux towers, to get at these different mechanistic responses to change and the potential different pathways of how they'll change in the future. And so Pangea is really focused on understanding how vulnerable or resilient tropical forest landscapes are. And we're using the term landscapes here to refer to these as kind of embedded social ecological systems. And what are the implications of those changes for carbon cycle and climate perturbations? So the objectives of Pangea are really to characterize and quantify heterogeneous tropical forest responses to change, to constrain model uncertainty of future tropical carbon flux predictions by, again, improving process understanding, calibration and validation, and algorithm development needs, so that we can actually more effectively use satellite data over the tropics, which is a very cloudy region, making it difficult to use satellite data. I'll come back to that in a moment. So the science and applications we're focused on are many. This is a large campaign, and it encompasses a lot of different dimensions and disciplines. And so we're thinking about carbon stocks and carbon cycle dynamics, not just in terms of CO2 and carbon stocks, but methane, lateral flows of carbon. We're thinking about the biodiversity that underpins this heterogeneity in responses, and how can we better understand the processes that underpin those patterns of diversity. We're looking at variability in terms of both multi-decadal trends and extreme events, disturbances, land atmosphere interactions, and human dimensions. One example, we're working with a lot of indigenous communities to incorporate questions and approaches that would better integrate indigenous, local, and traditional ecological knowledge. And so these different, in the Venn diagram here, those different headings are the working groups that are currently working to finalize the science questions and knowledge gaps that Pangea could address. And on the right, it's a little, I think it's, oh no, yeah, it's all there. I just revised it last night, so it looks different. Mitigation, management, conservation, and adaptation are the applications we're thinking about with Pangea. We think there's a huge opportunity to improve how we make scientific output through remote sensing, but I think conversations yesterday also kind of hinted at the potential for that from flux tower data to support decision making related to all of the things that you see here on the screen. So this would be funded by NASA, right? There's an inherent focus on satellite remote sensing data sets. And we're at a point with satellite data that is quite different from where we were when LBA was happening. We have a whole new suite of data sets that are allowing us to kind of parse out the carpet of green in these systems to more interesting and I think scientifically relevant metrics of diversity, structure, function to better understand what's going on. And so Pangea is focused on improving our ability to use all sorts of satellite data sets, including LIDAR, radar, hyperspectral. Increasingly, we have data sets that are starting to get at flux dynamics, like the orbiting carbon observatories, TRPOMI. But again, there's huge knowledge gaps when it comes to how effective these are in the tropics. And that's in part due to cloud cover. It's in large part due to massive data gaps and methods gaps. So again, this comes back to the fundamental approach of these campaigns, really scaling to, over the course of the campaign, improve our ability to effectively understand what are we able to get from remote sensing data and what are we not able to get from remote sensing data, and therefore what do we need continued long-term measurements on the ground for to support elements of understanding of these systems and how they're responding to change that we just won't get from satellite data. And Pangea is focused on not just intact systems, but gradients of disturbance as well as agroecosystems, and this includes wetlands and peatlands as well. The domain is interesting. I can't go into too much detail about this now, and I'm happy to answer questions, but effectively we would target coordinated landscapes within this core domain, focusing on comparisons and differences between the Americas and Africa. And then there's an extended domain over which all Pangea satellite remote sensing and modeling activities would be carried out across the pantropical region. I think I'm close to wrapping up, but one of the things that's most important to say here is that the timing of this is really critical. There's a lot of activities already going on in the tropics, led by researchers from the tropics and many other international institutions. And there's a critical opportunity for Pangea to coordinate with those. There's still gaps that need to be filled that aren't being met by these activities. And so we're working really hard to identify and coordinate, including with FluxNet community members, to make sure that what comes out of Pangea would be in alignment with and able to support these existing efforts. The other thing I'll mention is that this year we've been traveling all across the tropics to make sure that what's going into this white paper is really representing what is deemed important and necessary by folks working in the tropics. So we've had workshops in Cameroon for a Central African community workshop, Thailand, Brazil, Peru, and then a big workshop in DC where we brought a lot of folks from these regions to the US. So I'll end on the three pillars of Pangea, which is first to really understand scientifically what are the heterogeneous responses of these systems to change. Capacity building is a big component of what we're proposing, training the next generation of scientists, including scientists from these countries to lead this work going forward, and thinking about how to improve capabilities for monitoring biodiversity, agriculture, and carbon cycle dynamics from these kinds of data sets. So I'll leave this up if I don't know if we have time for questions, but you can check out our website using this QR code, and you're welcome to contact me directly. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Elsa. We don't have time for questions, but there were some that came in on Zoom that maybe you could respond to.
Definitely.
Elsa will be here all day, I think, too. So great. All right. Next up, we have Dave Moore and Marcy Litvak and Russ Scott virtually. Or maybe it's just going to be Dave that's presenting. Okay. Dave Moore on behalf of ARID.
Okay. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Dave Moore. I am not the PI of the ARID group, but I'm here on behalf of that team. And as Elsa pointed out, she did a lot of the work that my proposal or that my presentation could have done. So thanks for that. I'll see if I can. So again, it's a very large team. So this is a huge team. It's led by Sasha Reed and Andrew Feldman. The goal here is to include as many voices as possible as we put together the scoping study, right? So I also showed the timeline. This is kind of where we are in it. We're in the middle of this year-long scoping study where we're developing these proposals. The one thing that I'd add is that we are about to enter. Should I get in over here? Okay, we're about to enter a phase of open comment. So in September, we are going to submit both of the proposals to NASA, and they will facilitate a comment period. So if you hadn't been contacted by these teams already, if you're not part of a working group, if you haven't been annoyed by a survey sent out by one or other of these teams, you still have the opportunity to comment on both documents before NASA sees them, and we'll have a chance to respond. So that's where we're at in the team. On the things that the field projects are supposed to do, I just highlighted two of the things that we're very good at here in the AmeriFlux community, answering big questions across very large scales, and leaving a legacy of data of great value for future researchers. Right. We also want to leverage as much data as we can. Right. So why drylands? There's more drylands than you think, right? We're not talking about just deserts, right? We're not talking about hyper-arid regions. There's a lot of vegetation in drylands. They cover a wide swath of the earth. We're talking about 40% of the land area on the planet. The global population, 35% of the global population relies on these systems in some way. 60% of food production is coming from drylands. 40% of NPP. And then one of the complicating things is that the interannual variability of the land carbon sink, right? Because these systems are very, very responsive to temperature and moisture, they confuse our understanding of the land carbon sink. And then 50%, 52% of soil carbon is shocking to me because a lot of it is inorganic carbon. There's a massive amount of inorganic carbon in drylands. I put this for just in case there was someone from Australia in the room. Um, so yeah, so the Australian weather forecast, it seems like they're inventing new colors. I don't know if ultraviolet is visible in weather forecasts in the future, but it's getting quite difficult to add higher and higher temperatures to things. And then where I'm from, 42 degrees Celsius is how it cools down to. It cools down to 42 degrees Celsius. So it's not a surprise that arid lands are the sort of, if you wanted to understand how warming is and extreme heat is affecting ecosystems, arid lands are a good place to go see that. The consequences of these things can be pretty extreme, right? So we can, you can see Chris kicked us off yesterday with some really profound responses of the heat dome. There's also huge tipping point possibilities, right? So you could actually lose critical ecosystem functions. So that 40% of NPP is in iron. Just critical thresholds can be crossed. The other complicating thing about drylands is if you look across the globe, these are all pictures of different drylands. One, they're greener than you think, right? And two, the vegetation can be quite difficult for satellites to see. So it's not because of clouds, as you might have known, right? We have lots and lots of cloud-free days. We can observe the systems very, very well. However, the vegetation is very patchy and the responses are very, very flashy. So you get rapid changes in things that are quite small, right? And patchy and difficult. So if you were in the reason that we think it is now is the time for a campaign on arid lands is because the technology has evolved that we can see things at very, very high resolution very, very quickly. So we actually have the capabilities to see these in satellites, but we still need these high resolution point observations and aircraft campaigns to keep us going. I mentioned before that the carbon sink, the stocks, carbon stocks, I would say, in answer to Marcy's question yesterday, is you know, is Arizona and New Mexico good places to store carbon? Possibly not. I think the state's going to be disappointed by that. We do have trees, we do have some carbon stocks, but it's very, very important to understand the interannual variability of the carbon cycle and the response to water. So where are we going? You know, we have been engaging across the world, different folks across the different arid zones across the planet. The idea is that we would, you know, NASA is very comfortable and has managed to do some campaigns across the world, but they also may be interested in doing things within the United States. So we have a global focus, a global reach, but a Western US focus. I've mapped out, some of you may recognize some eddy covariance sites on this diagram in the Western United States. We're tentatively planning, right? As Elsa mentioned, the actual planning is going to happen after the decision is made of where flights go. So we're tentatively showing, we're trying to show that if we did aircraft campaigns across the Western United States, we would pick up a lot of the variability that is observed across the world. We'd like to do campaigns across other parts of the world too. So the general scaling plan, very similar to what you might expect. You have an eddy covariance system. You might have people doing some little work in that system, doing experiments. There might be some near-Earth remote sensing, thermal cameras or phenocams or whatever else we do, drones, aircraft, and satellite, right? And you can, there's a very developed modeling framework where you might imagine putting all of these types of different measurements in context and improving Earth system and land surface models of a variety of complexities. There are, essentially we're trying to break this down. We're trying to be as inclusive as possible because this is a scoping study that we will have aircraft and NASA resources deployed, but really it will result in 8 to 10 years of requests for proposals that anyone in the community can propose to do research within the scope of this study. So we're trying to be inclusive. The general idea is to look at drivers of change in arid lands, responses of change in arid lands, and then really try and include management situations and human adaptation because the potential for thresholds to be crossed. So if you don't see your favorite thing, again, we're gonna be having an open comment period. So comment on your favorite thing, and then we'll have to deal with it in the proposal, right? So for questions, Marcy's involved. Is there anyone else in the room that's involved in a working group or anything like that? Erica might be involved. I don't know. Russ Scott is online. I'm around. If you don't know Sasha Reed or Andrew Feldman, but if you want to get involved, just let us know, and then watch for that open comment period. All right. Thanks. There's no more red, so I'll go away.
There's no more red, yeah, but please seek out Marcy or Dave to ask more questions. Seems to me like NASA should probably just fund both of these. All right, next up we have Emma Reich from NAU.
I see. Or oh, okay. Okay, cool. So hi everyone. I'll be talking about decoupling of transpiration, gross primary productivity, and solar-induced fluorescence at the ecosystem scale. So this was all part of the FluxNet secondment program. So FluxNet funded me to go to Germany for 6 weeks, where I got to work on this floor and meet a lot of great people who connected me to the collaborators on this project. And I got to live up here, which made for a very immersive experience. A very immersive experience and a good work-life balance. So transpiration and photosynthesis are considered coupled because they're both controlled by stomatal activity. But at high temperatures, it has been observed that photosynthesis ceases and transpiration continues to occur because stomata continue to stay open. And this graph in the upper right-hand corner here represents what we might expect from a classic decoupling example as temperature increases, where transpiration continues to increase and photosynthesis plateaus and then will maybe start to decrease. So we used a collected data set of paired eddy covariance and solar-induced fluorescence data, where we partitioned gross primary productivity from the net ecosystem exchange and transpiration from evapotranspiration, and then solar-induced fluorescence was collected via ground-based spectral measurements. And so in this study, we're interested in the decoupling between gross primary productivity and transpiration, SIF and transpiration, but then also GPP and SIF, since they're also expected to decouple under periods of heat stress. So our first question was, how does temperature drive transpiration, SIF, and GPP? And our second question was, under what conditions and in what ecosystem types do transpiration and photosynthesis indices, SIF and GPP, decouple? So for this study, we used something called a stochastic antecedent model to learn about what the distinct effects of temperature were on GPP, SIF, and transpiration. And so this is just, this could be thought of as a simple regression where we either used GPP, SIF, or transpiration as the response variable, and then we regress the on air temperature, vapor pressure deficit, soil moisture, and photosynthetically active radiation. But in this framework, we're able to account for the antecedent effects of each of these covariates and also the interactions. And we also calculated transpiration in an ET partitioning framework, which helped us account for the uncertainty of our partitioning method in the regression. And we took the partial derivative of GPP, SIF, and T relative to each covariate of interest. And this helped us disentangle the specific effects of temperature from the specific effects of vapor pressure deficit, for example. Also incorporating the antecedent conditions and the interactive effects. So what is the distinct effect of temperature on GPP, SIF, and T at each of these sites? So if you look at these graphs here, whenever there's a divergence in the patterns of these set sensitivities, we can expect there might be a decoupling event taking place, or that the effects of temperature are distinct on either GPP, SIF, or transpiration. So at this Litvak site here, this is a beach forest site. You can see that as temperatures increase, the net sensitivity of GPP to temperature starts to decrease. And if you look at this bottom graph here for transpiration, you can see that as temperatures increase, the net sensitivity of transpiration to temperature continues to increase. So this might be mechanistically what's going behind a decoupling event. And then you look over here on the right at the Gebisi site. This is a wheat site in Germany. You can see that at higher temperatures, the net sensitivity of GPP to temperature continues to increase, but the net sensitivity of transpiration to temperature begins to decrease at higher temperatures. So we might expect stomata to be closing and water use efficiency to be increasing. And so we ran one more regression where we looked at what temperatures do GPP, SIF, and transpiration start to decouple specifically. And can we predict at what temperatures these decoupling events will occur at each sites? So on the left here, we have this, again, this classic example of what decoupling will look like. And we took another partial derivative, but this time on a regression of GPP regressed against transpiration in all covariates, and a regression of SIF regressed on GPP, transpiration, all covariates. So then we can specifically look at the rate of change of GPP and SIF and transpiration compared with each other. This is a conceptual diagram I made to help show you how we can interpret some of these graphs. So when the value is positive, it means that transpiration and photosynthesis are moving in the same direction. When this line crosses the x-axis, it means that the relationship between the two variables we're looking at becomes negative, and this is when decoupling starts to occur. So whatever temperature is on the x-axis, that's the temperature at which we predict decoupling to start. And then when the value is negative, photosynthesis is decreasing, but transpiration is increasing. So this is the decoupling territory. So if you look at these two graphs with the wheat site on the left and the beach forest site on the right, you can see that we never expect the wheat site to experience decoupling. GPP and transpiration continue to become more and more correlated as temperature increases. But the Litvak site, around 28 to 30 degrees, decoupling starts to occur. And if we look at all sites between GPP and transpiration, we can see that for about half of them, we expect them to decouple somewhere between 28 and 30 degrees Celsius. And then half of the sites, we expect them to either decouple at unrealistically high temperatures, or we never expect them to decouple, like the Gebisi site, which just keeps going up into space. And we never expect SIF and transpiration to decouple. Even at higher temperatures, they continue to become more correlated. And between SIF and GPP, we can see that they're expected to decouple at shockingly similar temperatures to GPP and transpiration, which has a lot of implications for how we're looking at SIF at higher temperatures and how it might be a better indicator of transpiration than photosynthesis in these extreme conditions. So in conclusion, by isolating the changes of GPP and transpiration relative to temperature, we found evidence of decoupling at the ecosystem scale. And SIF and transpiration are never likely to decouple, and GPP decouples from transpiration and SIF at remarkably similar temperatures. And with that, I would like to thank everyone involved in this project.
Talk is coming online. Thank you. Yeah. From Pramit Burman.
Hi, are you able to see my screen? Do you see the slides?
Yep, looks good. And we can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. So hello everyone, myself Pramit Burman from the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune, will be presenting our work today on Spaceborne SIF signal detects the impact of monsoon on the photosynthetic carbon uptake by a subtropical forest in India. So, as we know that the unprecedented rise of greenhouse gases, including CO2 since industrial revolution, has resulted in the greenhouse gases forcing and the climate change. And as of now, in the last few months, the concentration already reached around 425, more than that actually, ppm. And as we all know that there are different sinks of global carbon cycle, out of which the land carbon sink is one of the most prominent one, which actually sequesters almost 3.3 gigaton of carbon per year in this period, which is taken from the global carbon budget and which was larger than the ocean sink. And not only that, the land is a very heavily constrained resource which actually supports agricultural food production, then human resource and human habitat and everything. So in this context, it becomes very important to know their carbon sequestration and that they are their drivers. However, in the case of India, it's a big country and it's a heavily populated country. And here, actually, 21.7% Indian landmass is forested, which are highly biodiverse and located in different climates because the northern part of India is almost 30-degree north, whereas the southern part is almost 5-degree north. There's a lot of climate gradient and different types of forest ecosystems exist here. However, their carbon sequestration is potentially large but mostly unknown. But these are important to be known for to be computed for INDC and another BUR and all these reports, as we are the signatory of the Paris Climate Accord. And also the flux tower-based easy methods provide the most accurate estimate of the terrestrial carbon cycle. But satellite-based products have wider spatial coverage, but their temporal resolution remains poor, and also they need the ground validation. Now, SIF, the solar-induced chlorophyll fluorescence, has emerged as a good proxy of photosynthetic activity. However, over India, they also remain unexplored, mostly due to the non-availability of the decovariance dataset. So in this context, actually, our objective in this study is to study the efficacy of SIF data in monitoring the photosynthetic activity of a subtropical forest, then to comparatively assess the performance of several satellite-based SIF data products for this purpose, and finally to check if the environmental regulations of terrestrial carbon uptake are reflected in these measurements. So our study site is known as Kaziranga National Park, which is located in northeastern part of India, which has got an above average forest coverage in India. Almost like 65% of this land is forested, and it is one of the wettest places on the earth. And these are the flux tower coordinates, which is located in a humid subtropical climate. Canopy type is semi-evergreen and average canopy height is 20 meters. And we have been continuing the flux tower measurement over here since July 2015, and all of the details are listed here. Ancillary measurements and all. I'm not going through those due to shortage of time. If you're interested, I'll be happy to answer those, by the way. So these are the remote sensing data sets we have used in this work. So SIF is actually the energy that is emitted by the excited electrons of chlorophyll when they absorb the photosynthetically active radiation and they come back to their ground state. And these are all the different SIF data sets which are available. And since our study period is from 2016 to 2018, we could only use 4 out of those, which is GOM2, then OCO2, then GOSAT, and then So OCO2, GOM2, and GOSAT, 3 of these. And we have also taken the fraction of photosynthetically active radiation from MODIS, that is version 6.1 MCD15A3H. and we have computed the APAR as a multiplication between FAPAR and PAR. PAR is measured at the ground at flux tower. We have also computed one metric called SIF use efficiency, which is analogous to light use efficiency after Guantar et al. So now let me go into the findings. So basically, these are the gross parametric productivity at daily scale at Kaziranga at the KNP actually. So as you can see throughout the pre-monsoon or throughout the springtime, actually the carbon sequestration increases, reaches maximum by the end of springtime. So locally, springtime is known as pre-monsoon in India, and then monsoon is the summer monsoon. Then after that is post-monsoon, which is basically autumn, and then winter. So in the pre-monsoon, actually the carbon uptake is maximum, and after that it actually saturates and then finally decreases to be minimum in winter. And as you can see, most of the SIF products actually are more or less able to capture that pattern. And we have also checked the efficacy of different products by computing the Taylor diagram, which is a graphical way to represent the variability and the correlation in a data set actually. So basically in this diagram, we plot the standard deviation along the x-axis along and standard deviation, sorry, along the radius actually. So if you move further from the origin, then standard deviation is more. And on the x-axis, the correlations are actually defined by these different lines, different radius. So if you're on the x-axis, then your correlation is 1. If you're on the y-axis, correlation is 0 with the reference dataset, which is EC. So as you can see here, actually the GOSAT datasets, GOSAT 757 and 771, these two bands, this actually perform much better than GOM2. We have not included OCO2 in this analysis because during our study period, the number of data points in OCO2 was quite less. The interesting point to note here, actually, there was a dip in the photosynthetic carbon uptake in 2016, which was missing in 2018. And this is due to the effect of cloudiness. And if you want more details, these are already published. The SIF and GPP, we have checked the linear relationship between them for different bands and different products. And as you can see, for all of the data sets, there is a linear regression. Of course, there are more scattered in GOSAT and GOM2, and there are very less number of points in OCO2, but still it is linear. Relationships are linear. And also we have checked their efficacy, the linear regressions at different temporal scales. I'm not showing those due to the shortage of time, but then these are the final outputs from those actually, summary of those. So the regressions actually improve from daily to fortdaily, then weekly, and at bi-weekly, they are much improved from daily, which has been reported earlier from other places across the globe. Now, the interesting thing to note here, actually, let us look into the bimodal feature in more detail for Kaziranga National, for this site actually. And these are actually plotted here at bi-weekly scale. We can see here that the carbon uptake that increases and becomes maximum by the end of May. And then it decreases further. And in the June, actually, it dips down quite a lot. And then further it increases and it actually reaches the second peak by the end of September almost. And then it decreases. So there is a bimodal peak. And this peak, as if you see in both GOSAT 757 and GOSAT 771, actually we have retained GOSAT 757 and 771 in this analysis because in the last slide I have showed you that outperforms GOM2, and also for the reason that GOM2 data was not available for the entire duration here. That is one of the reasons. So as you can see here, actually, it increases, and this peak, the first peak actually, that is replicated in both the bands, and then it decreases. It doesn't decrease as much as the decrease in GPP, but then again there is an occurrence of second peak because here onwards, from 240th day actually, it increases again. So there is a second peak which is noted here. And then the same thing, in a similar way, actually, in 2018, there was only a single peak. There was no such a dip. And then in the SIP datasets also, you can see it is following the GPP and it is having an unimodal pattern. And more interestingly, if we plot the SIF use efficiency at both these wavelengths, actually, 757 and 771 nanometer, this bimodal pattern, this bimodal pattern is even more visible. So the first peak is observed around between 120th to 150th day, and then the second peak that is even more prominent than the SIF data itself, that is in the month of September, 240th to 270th day in 2016. But in case of 2018, again, there is only one peak, which is during 150th to 180th day. That means in the June, in the monsoon time actually, and this prominent splitting of two peaks are missing. It's not there. So then we looked into these relationships in more detail at seasonal scale. And I must tell you at this moment that in KNP, which is at KNP, in contradiction to the most parts of the mainland India, the monsoon, actually, if you look into the other parts of India, Then the monsoon is the key driver of ecosystem greening and the productivity. So you will see maximum productivity during monsoon, but in case of Kaziranga, in KNP actually, it is quite different. It is the pre-monsoon or the springtime when they take up maximum carbon, and there are reasons behind that, which are described in our earlier papers actually. So we have actually considered these two seasons for this analysis, which is in more detail. And here we have plotted the 4 daily scale linear regression between GOSAT SIF, both the bands 757 and 771, and GPP. So if you see here, actually, for all the 3 seasons, pre-monsoon 2016, 2018, and monsoon 2018, there is a linear increasing trend between GPP and SIF. But in monsoon 2016, there is a decreasing trend. And this is the period where we have seen the dip actually in the photosynthetic carbon uptake. So, and we are still doing some more analysis, but due to the shortage of time, I'm not able to show those here. So in summary, we can conclude that the SIF products actually have good potential to track the photosynthesis at this forest, and GOSAT has the densest measurement and widest coverage for this forest. The linearity between satellite SIF signal and ECGBP records, they improve with temporal downscaling or averaging, and the anomalous environment conditions result in a negative relation between SIF and GPP. And I would like to thank you for your patience, and I would like to acknowledge my team members and our funders. And I would also like to take this opportunity to let you know that this Kaziranga National Park on northeastern part of India, that is actually part of this very high mega diverse Indo-Malaccan biodiverse zone actually. And in this region we find some high biodiversity in flora and fauna both, specifically these rhinoceros that you see. So all these pictures are taken by us, me or my colleagues actually during working in this flux tower. And this is the unicorn rhinoceros, which is unique to India. That has got only one horn. I mean, in contradiction to the African rhino, which has got 2 horns. And then there are deers, there are tuskers, and also Royal Bengal tigers and bison. And also we call this a land of big 5 because we have big 5 mammals over here. And thank you for your patience. I'll be happy to answer any question that you might have.
All right, we have time for a question. I'll ask one. I'm curious how your results would compare with just reflectance data from a finer resolution satellite, and if you'd had considered looking at that.
So yes, we had looked into OCO2 data. OCO2 data, which is available as the SIF product, we have looked into that. But if you mean any local measurement of SIF using some spectroradiometer or something, no, we don't have that. We are planning to purchase one, but still we don't. Till now, we don't have.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.